On October 21st, the Lake City Columbia County Chamber of Commerce sponsored a chamber enhancement luncheon at Florida Gateway College. The subject of the event was proposed amendments to the Florida Constitution. The guest was County Attorney-elect Joel Foreman, who spoke on the proposed changes. This program is 27 minutes long.
And welcome everybody to the Lake City Columbia County Chamber of Commerce Business Enhancement Luncheon. Today we are going to talk about the constitutional amendments that will appear on the ballot on November 4th. The Florida Constitution has a provision that allows for petition and or the legislature to put onto ballots for election constitutional amendments. With me is Joel Foreman, the County Attorney-elect for the County of Columbia. Joel, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
Joel has looked over these amendments. There are only 3. In previous years, we've had as many as 10 constitutional amendments on the ballot, which have caused some quagmires at the Supervisor of Elections office during election time when a lot of people don't realize what they're voting on because they've not been exposed to that. That's why the Chamber of Commerce has put together this luncheon today. I guess we'll just get started. We wanted to get everybody out of the event today by at least 12:30. I mentioned some at 1. I know a lot of you have to get back to work before 1 o'clock, so we'll try to get everybody in and out of here by 12:30. First of all, we have amendment number 1, and I'm going to try to read it and try to make sense of it as it is written, and I may screw this up, but I'm going to go for it anyway. Funds the Land Acquisition Trust, funds to acquire, restore, improve, or manage conservational lands, including wetlands and forests, fish and wildlife habitat, lands protecting water quality of rivers, lakes and streams, beaches and shores, outdoor recreational lands, farms and ranches, and historic or geologic sites by dedicating 33% of net revenues from the existing excise tax on documents for the next 20 years. And you were wondering, it's behind me, but I'm looking at it over there. What is this?
Okay, the easy way to translate it is we have this pot of money that we get through these doc stamps, what we refer to them as doc stamps, generates about $2 billion a year in revenues. And what this amendment essentially does is say every year we're going to take a third of that and we're going to place it into a trust fund where it can be expended for conservation purposes. What the amendment essentially does with respect to that 1/3 of that $2 billion in revenue is earmark it and says, legislature, you can't spend it for anything else. You must spend it for the stated purposes that are set forth in the amendment. What it does, the reason it's in the Constitution, is it is taking that power of the purse that's vested with the legislature and sort of curtailing it, stripping it back. It's projected again that the first year this would be in effect, it would generate $600–700 million in revenues. By the 20th year that it would be in effect, and it does sunset after 20 years, you're looking at about $1.5 billion.
Let me ask you a question. You look at this and it looks like everything good, quality of rivers, lakes, streams, but then that's the good. The bad is that this is revenue that already exists through the state of Florida. That revenue is not replaced anywhere, correct?
Right, and it is being marketed. You know, we're able to fund this without a tax increase. But it's just like our household budgets. If we take a third of money that we're spending on our mortgage or on our car payment or something like that and decide to dedicate it somewhere else, we still have those liabilities. And that's where you're seeing a lot of the opposition voices from that policy concern, is that we need to leave it to our elected officials to decide how best to spend this money as they've been doing. And by invading this fund, you know, a full third, you're really going to force some very, very difficult decisions outside of the conservation sphere. I do know the money is split up among numerous administrative functions. Public defender told me that his office received some of this money and he's concerned that some of it might not be available. The competing consideration is, from the folks that are supporting this amendment, is if we don't do it this way, the legislature's demonstrated over the last several years that they're not going to do anything. And so that's why you have these voter initiatives where if they're seeing a lack of action on the part of the legislature, they can get involved, and that's what you have here. That's where this amendment comes from.
So there's really no way of knowing where the money is, the 33% of that fund is going to be taken from?
Well, and in fact, the financial analysis was conducted. I'm looking on what I think to be a very good and impartial website called Ballotpedia. I'm not sure if anybody's seen that. Certainly on all three of these amendments, I would encourage anybody that's even considering voting one way or the other to do your research. You know, it wasn't too many years ago we had a lot of people hollering that our elected officials were voting on bills before they even read them. This is exactly the same thing. You are essentially voting on legislation, actually superior to legislation. You're voting on a change to your Constitution. Get informed about it. So I'm preaching to the choir to the folks that are here and the folks that are actually taking the time to watch this video. But tell your friends and neighbors that they need to understand this stuff. But the fiscal note that's here basically says we can project the revenues that are going to be stripped out and reallocated, but they're not able to project the true financial impact because this money is so broken up across so many departments within the state. What you can be sure of, however, is that, again, either there's going to be really tough decisions with respect to some cuts, or while there's no tax increase here, there might be a tax increase somewhere else to make up the shortfall. You don't pass these sorts of things without anticipating certain consequences.
I heard from a proponent of this amendment that some money may come from water management district funds or for budgets. Have you heard that?
I don't know that. The amendment, which again, you have to look at what we call the four corners. The four corners of that document, the amendment, say that the money will come strictly from these revenues. It also clearly says that they will not be commingled with other revenues. So while the water management districts might come forward, and maybe the water management districts are going to lose some funding as a consequence of this, that might be where the angle is. We only know what the amendment's telling us.
When it's written, if you're against this amendment, the voter is voting to not allow dock stamps, 33% of dock stamps to go to this fund.
Yeah.
If you're for it, this goes into place, correct?
Right. A no vote.
It's not like a trick on the ballot that if you vote no, you really mean yes. I know a lot of people have looked at constitutional amendments in the past, and that the way they've been written, there could be that in it, but not with this one.
No, and I think all three amendments on the ballot this year are relatively straightforward. If you vote yes, you are voting for it. If you vote no, you're voting for the status quo, which is really the way to look at a no vote. I just want to leave things the way they are.
And again, if you want more information on this, the state of Florida's website has got these constitutional amendments listed in their entirety. What you're going to see on the ballot is just a brief summation of what we're talking about today. So you're not going to see the entire amendment at the ballot box. So we encourage you, if you've got time, to check it out online. Go to the library. You can check it out at a library that has internet access. Move on to the Second Amendment, which is Amendment 2. I'm going to read this. This allows the medical use of marijuana for individuals with debilitating diseases as determined by a licensed Florida physician. This allows caregivers to assist patients' medical use of marijuana. The Department of Health shall register and populate centers that produce and distribute marijuana for medical purposes. This has gotten a lot of press. Is it as it seems? As you read it, is this the way it...
Is anything ever really as it seems? Now, this amendment has created, obviously, a lot of buzz on various levels. You have the core policy question, which is, should Florida legalize medicinal marijuana that's smoked purely for medicinal purposes? Interestingly enough, you have the Florida Medical Association, you have the Florida Sheriff's Association, various law enforcement entities coming out against this, and the reason is not for lack of compassion, in their words. It's for lack of understanding and concern about how do you differentiate between the medicinal product and the contraband product, which look identical. The only difference is going to be this identification card, which the amendment seems to call for. This is one where I would really encourage folks to go out and actually read this amendment. Don't count on the summary. That summary is a paragraph that's going to appear on your ballot. The amendment itself is more than 2 typewritten pages that includes what I consider to be fairly complex legislation. The sort of stuff that we elect people to go up to Tallahassee and look at and debate on and weigh before they vote. So this will be a classic example. Don't vote on it unless you've read it, unless you understand what you're getting into here. One of the points that's been raised is that these dispensaries, you won't go into a Walgreens and purchase this product. You won't go into a CVS and purchase this product, or your local drugstore. You're going to go to a dispensary. And there's a lot of questions that are unresolved and that the amendment doesn't address with respect to how exactly those are going to be operated and run. It delegates to the legislature, you need to come up with rules, and provides a deadline, but again, we don't know what those rules are going to be. So you're starting to talk about a lot more nuts and bolts questions than the core policy question, which is what folks are, the folks that are supporting this are counting on people stopping at the question of should we legalize medicinal marijuana. They're not counting on people actually going into the nuts and bolts of it.
What do law enforcement people, what are they saying? I know the sheriff has had some problems with this as it is written.
I know our sheriff has some concerns. The Florida Sheriff's Association, again, it's about creating means to disperse or distribute marijuana that, again, you take it out of context, it's identical to the same product that law enforcement is out there trying to get off the streets. And so where they're envisioning a problem is enforcement and regulation, actually getting out there, policing this in addition to policing their obligations in terms of drug task force activities and things like that. They just envision a real problem, and they think the cost of enforcement is going to go way up, far more than the revenues that might be generated off this. One of the things you hear is, there's going to be a lot of sales tax generated through the sale of this. It's very likely that it'll be exempt from sales tax. So again, the financial analysis on this amendment is just as problematic as it was on the last one, in that nobody can predict what the actual impact's going to be.
Now, I was reading the first line. It's debilitating diseases as determined by a licensed physician. Not real specific about the debilitating disease. And I'm assuming this is going to be, debilitating will be determined in a court of law at some point.
Well,
what does that mean? And is a physician going to determine that?
It's actually interesting, Mike, because you've had folks on both sides arguing the point of ambiguity and generality, claiming it to their advantage. The folks that are in favor of it say, well, sure, it's vague. It's vague because we want the legislature to fill in the blanks. Well, opponents are saying it's too vague. We don't know what it's going to do. The folks who drafted it say that it's vague by design, it's ambiguous by design, it's supposed to allow for the doctor and the patient to have that ability to have their doctor-patient relationship, which has been protected by the United States Constitution through a right to privacy that's recognized. And that actually draws us to another point. Nothing we do here is going to in any way affect what comes down from the federal level, including the rights that are recognized by the federal government and the legislation and the statutes. The amendment itself, if you read it, says, nothing herein shall require a violation of federal law, nothing herein shall supersede federal law. That's all still going to be in effect. So even though Florida says you can have this, it's very likely that the federal government is going to have a different view.
So if the feds have a problem with your dispensary and they feel that there's some problems there, they could come in and arrest you and charge you with a federal crime.
I won't go that far, but let's say there's going to be an opportunity for some conflict of laws issues. Now, the good news is we're not the first ones to the table on this issue. We'd be somewhere in the mid-20s, 23, 24, to go this far. So a lot of these issues have been worked out in terms of the state and federal government, but it's out there. It's out there.
Is there, can this be abused? Are there a lot of opportunities for this to be abused? I mean, I'm looking at forgery of ID cards that, I've got this debilitating disease, and so now here's my card, give me my marijuana.
Law enforcement's concerns, as I've heard them, you'll remember not too long ago, Florida was the capital for what we called pill mills. And essentially people would travel down with their prescription in hand for whatever sort of, oxycodone, whatever it was they wanted to purchase and take back to their home state. They'd be pulled over, they'd be questioned by law enforcement, and they'd waive that prescription and be on your way. There is concern that folks will have these cards, these identification cards. They'll use them to procure whatever it is they want to procure. They'll be caught with whatever amount they may have. They'll waive the prescription card, and off they go. There's an analog there historically. There has been a crackdown in Florida in terms of the pill mill stuff. They're concerned they're going to have to devote the same law enforcement resources to control fraud, to control abuse within this amendment.
Anything else to add? I mean, I obviously read it and see.
Read it, definitely, and understand that, you know, the question of whether or not Florida should legalize medicinal marijuana is not necessarily the only question being answered by this amendment. It really needs to be studied.
All right, we're going to move on to Amendment 3. And again, this is going to be a short show because we've only got 3 to talk about. This authorizes the governor to prospectively fill a vacancy in a judicial office to which election for retention applies that results from a justice's or judge's reaching mandatory retirement age, failure to qualify for a retention election, or failure to be retained through an election. Under current law, the governor may not act to fill such a vacancy until after the current justice or judge completes his or her term. Reading the beginning of that, I thought, I'm no lawyer. I can't understand this. What does that mean?
It's actually before I came on, not a half an hour ago, I got a call from another lawyer friend. Can you explain this one to me? Because I'm not quite getting it. A couple of things about this one. The first 2 amendments were voter-led initiatives. You had different groups that got behind groups of voters and they petitioned. This one comes from the legislature. And this one, for better or for worse, is very much wrapped up in politics. We have a Republican-controlled legislature, and the way it works now, just as the summary says, is if a judge ages off, which means reaches the age of 70, or if a judge fails to qualify for retention. We have retention voting in this state. Most of us have gone to the ballot box and seen, should this judge be retained? Those are all incorporated into our Constitution. What it doesn't necessarily provide for, however, is if that judge ages off or if that judge fails retention, when exactly the sitting governor gets to make the appointment. Okay? As it's read right now, and the proponents of this claim there's an ambiguity, but as it's read right now, you wait until that judge's term runs, then you begin the appointment process. The prospective fill would allow for the appointment process to begin immediately. That matters because if you are, for example, a governor that's failed to win re-election, and there are some Supreme Court justices who have aged off, or there are some appellate judges who have failed retention, you could make those appointments from a lame duck posture. So you could go ahead and fill some of these judicial seats on the way out, as opposed to the way it's currently read, without the amendment, seems to require that governor would wait until the end of his term. The appointment process would begin, so under current law, the new governor would make those appointments. So you can see in an election that's as closely contested as the one we have now for the governor's office, there's high stakes there. There's also, I believe, 3 Supreme Court seats that'll come up as a product of folks aging off, that this amendment could very well determine who gets to pick those people. Okay? So you've got, as anticipated, Republicans very much favoring the adoption of this amendment. You have Democrats very much hoping that it's going to fail.
Now, right now, you said there are 3 judges currently?
As I understand it, yeah.
And is that in the next term, under the next governor, or has it happened now?
I'm not positive what the timing on it is. I think the thought process is that it would happen with this governor.
It's kind of like a president pardoning people. If at the end of the term they can pardon someone who may have been. Go ahead.
Well, it's interesting too if you look at the way this amendment works. These other 2 amendments basically incorporate brand new language into the Constitution. This is an example where if you go read it, you can tell the legislature was involved because it's got strike through in the language they don't want anymore, and they've actually inserted the underlined language directly into the Constitution, the article of the Constitution setting up our judiciary. So this is just, not only is it instigated from a different source, but the mechanism for amendment is different. I think this one's easier to understand. If you understand what they're trying to do, reading it makes sense. So hopefully people, when they go to check on it and read up on it, they'll recognize that this is really just a deletion insertion type amendment.
So medical marijuana was by petition. The first one was by petition as well. This one was originated by the legislature of the state.
That's correct.
And those are the only 2 ways that these can happen, right?
I believe so.
Yeah. If the audience has any questions, we'll open it up. I'm going to have to say your question so everybody at home can hear as well. But does anybody have any questions on any of these that we talked about? Jeff?
Are there any other constitutional amendments that earmark dollars from funding similar
The question is, are you talking about the current slate of amendments?
Are there any other constitutional amendments that exist now that earmark that funding, take a percentage of funding for something like the
I think these are the only three.
You want to read back the question?
Well, the question is, are there any other constitutional amendments
in the Constitution now?
that? Yeah, I think there are.
As an example.
I don't have one for you right now. By way of example, like I said, my charge was sort of look at the four corners and see what the impact of that would be. I don't believe there's any other that takes money from dock stamps, particularly.
Now there are monies that taken from your pocket. I mean, when you consider the pig in the carton case that took place, a lot of pig farmers had to increase the size of the pens that pigs were kept in, and that was a constitutional amendment that passed 4 years ago. Yeah.
The lottery? I don't know. I wouldn't want to speak to it without reading a little more on it.
George?
There was, Lord Childs, there was a P2000 funding of $300 million a year for conservation and purchase of public lands. And then I think Jed took it to Forever Lands, and those appropriations were bought, and that land was purchased. And it was taken off the tax rate, but that was through the legislative process and by appropriation. But since the recession's come, there's been no properties been protected for resources from water and those kinds of things. So the public has spoken clearly here in Florida. We might not need developers running our state when it comes to conservation. My question though is, once this is approved, which the numbers, the polls shows that it's going to pass, from what I read, what you read. After it passes, this money that's funded for the next 20 years, what agency will determine how the money is spent throughout the state of Florida and the priorities? I don't know anything about that.
Question is that if Amendment 1 does pass and 33% of all revenue from dock stamps is taken away from where it normally goes, what agency is going to be charged with purchasing these lands? I don't know. I don't even know whether it may be written in the law, but the Department of Environmental Protection Agency would be the agency that I would assume would handle the money, but I don't know that for sure.
The requirement of the amendment is that the money be placed into the Land Acquisition Trust Fund, which is a trust fund that's already in existence, that's already handling the administration of the acquisition of conservation lands. I don't know what the operation of that trust fund is. I don't know if it has a separate board or if it's comprised of different members of the legislature and the Senate, but that same mechanism that's already in place would continue to receive these funds. So I don't think they're creating a brand new body or anything like that.
It's just not funded it. It's just not been funded that.
It hasn't been, I think you're right in terms of since the recession's kicked in and since revenues have gone down, this is one place where funding's got pulled out.
Right. And this was an issue, evidently the conservation is throughout the state of Florida. And in fact, I talked to a couple of them last night at Swanee River Water Management meeting here yesterday. They're concerned that there's not enough being done to protect Florida's lands. And so they actually went out and got the petition signed to make it happen on the ballot.
And I will say that when you review the different organizations that are supporting some of these amendments versus opposing, organizations line up. Florida Chamber lines up, law enforcement organizations line up. The list in support of this amendment is 10-1, the list in opposition. So I would tend to agree with you that in terms of the boots on the ground and the grassroots, the support does seem to be there for this one.
And I'm sure municipalities are the ones that are against their revenue being cut. Any other questions? Yes, Daniil.
I was wondering, on Amendment 2, or the medical marijuana, we've seen a lot of John Morgan as a private attorney that's been a big proponent of it. So I was wondering if there was some sort of, I know in the commercials he said it's because of his brother, but is there a profit margin for certain individuals? Like why would somebody like him, who's already quite wealthy, come out and make a stance just because he's got public opinion, or?
The question is, Morgan from Morgan & Morgan, John Morgan is in support of this. I believe he's actually spending his own money to buy ads to go in favor of this. I've heard the same thing you have, that a member of his family was injured terribly and is in constant pain, and that's why he's doing what he's doing. I don't know whether you've heard anything.
No. That is the public position, and he does in fact have a brother who's either I believe a quadriplegic.
He's got a commercial that shows him.
Right. And he might be paraplegic, though. I don't want to misspeak. John Morgan himself individually has contributed more than $250,000 to the campaign in support. His law firm, the Morgan Law Firm, is the #1 donor, according to the information I have here, at $3.57 million has been contributed in support of this. So if there's a profit angle in it for him, it would need to be fairly substantial. I obviously couldn't speak for the man, but he has been very vocal. He has been very active in his support of this amendment. And he's in fact the chairperson of the organization that sponsored the amendment.
Anybody else have any questions? Well, hopefully, Joel will be up here answer questions off camera if you have some questions for him. But we hope you've got a little better understanding of what you're going to be voting on starting Saturday. Early voting does start this Saturday. So you can vote on this starting Saturday at the local supervisor of elections office here in Columbia County. But we appreciate you coming. We appreciate that this is a very good crowd for something that could have been extremely boring. But we thank you for being here. We'll see you at the chamber mixer and the ribbon cutting this afternoon and the mixer on Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you.